The fork in my hand never reached the plate. My granddaughter slid something toward me under the table, a small, folded napkin. Her little hand was trembling. I smiled at her out of habit, thinking she'd drawn one of her silly little doodles again. She was always leaving me notes with hearts and flowers, but when I unfolded it, my stomach dropped. "Grandma, pretend you're sick and get out now." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I just stared at those words, written in shaky blue ink. Her eyes darted toward the other end of the table where my son, his wife Melissa, and her parents sat laughing too loudly, raising their wine glasses in some toast I hadn't been paying attention to. Something in my granddaughter's face, wide and frightened and pleading, made me obey without question. I set my fork down gently and pressed a hand to my chest. "I'm not feeling too well," I murmured. The conversation stopped. All eyes turned toward me. "Oh, Mom, really?" my son said with that tone. "You know the one. That tone of fake concern people use when they don't actually want to be bothered. It's Thanksgiving." His wife leaned closer to him, whispering something I couldn't quite hear, but I caught the smirk on her lips. "Before I continue, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment and let me know. I'd love to hear from you. And if this story is already pulling you in, do me a favor and hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because trust me, what I'm about to tell you will make your blood boil and your heart race. Now, back to that dinner table. "I think I'll just go home and rest," I said quietly. "It's been a long day. No one offered to help me up. Not my son, not Melissa, not her parents who'd been so friendly all evening. Except my granddaughter." She stood up quickly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I'll walk Grandma to the car." Her mother started to protest. "Sweetie, we haven't even had dessert yet." But the girl's voice shook when she spoke again. "Please, just for a minute." That's when I knew. That's when I knew something was terribly, horribly wrong. My son waved his hand dismissively. "Fine, fine. Hurry back." I stood slowly, steadying myself against the table. My legs felt strange, like they weren't quite attached to my body. The room suddenly felt too warm, too bright, too loud. As I walked toward the door with my granddaughter's small hand gripping mine, I could feel their eyes on my back, watching, waiting. The night air hit me like a slap when we stepped off the porch. Cold, sharp, real. My granddaughter didn't let go of my hand. Her fingers were ice cold, and I could feel them shaking. "Grandma," she whispered, glancing back at the house to make sure no one had followed us. "They were talking about you before dinner." My heart started pounding. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "They said after tonight, you wouldn't be living alone anymore." Her voice cracked. "They said they found papers, that you signed something about your house." I stopped walking right there by the mailbox. The streetlight above us flickered. "Papers?" I repeated. "What papers?" She nodded, tears starting to well up in her eyes. "They said you're forgetful now, that you don't know what you're doing anymore. But you're not forgetful, Grandma." "I know you're not." I stood there frozen, my breath coming out in little white clouds in the cold November air. And in that moment, standing under that flickering streetlight with my granddaughter crying beside me, a single thought pulsed through my mind like a drum. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. "Tell me everything," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "What exactly did you hear?" My granddaughter wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked so small standing there in her little cardigan, shivering in the cold. "I was in the hallway before dinner," she began. "I heard Dad and Mom talking in the kitchen with Grandpa Ron and Grandma Linda. They didn't know I was there." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. "Dad said something about a medical evaluation, that they already had it done. Mom laughed and said you didn't even know it happened." Her voice got quieter. "Then Grandpa Ron said the notary was coming after dessert, that once you signed the papers tonight, everything would be settled." My blood ran cold. A medical evaluation I didn't know about? A notary coming to my son's house? "Did they say what the papers were for?" I asked, though somewhere deep inside I already knew the answer. She nodded slowly. "Your house. They kept saying the property and the asset. Mom said once it was transferred, they could finally stop worrying about you being stubborn." Stubborn. That word hit me like a stone. I wasn't stubborn. I was independent. "There's a difference," And then, my granddaughter continued, her voice breaking again. Mom said something about a nice facility. She said you'd be happier there, that you wouldn't have to worry about anything anymore. A facility. They wanted to put me in a home and take my house. I looked back at the warm glow coming from the dining room windows. Inside, I could see shadows moving, laughing, celebrating, and I realized they were probably celebrating me, celebrating what they thought was already done. Sweetheart, I said gently, kneeling down to her level despite my aching knees. You did the right thing telling me. You probably just saved my life. She threw her arms around my neck, and I held her tight. This child, barely 10 years old, had more courage and loyalty than her own parents. As I drove home that night with her buckled in beside me, my mind raced backward through the past few weeks. Suddenly, everything made sense. The unexpected visits from my son, always with Melissa, always with that folder of papers they said were just routine insurance documents. The way they'd started talking slower to me, as if I couldn't understand basic sentences. The comments about my garden looking overwhelming and my house being too much to handle alone. I remembered last month when Melissa had insisted on coming with me to a doctor's appointment. I'd thought she was being kind, but the doctor had asked me strange questions that day. Questions about my memory, about whether I knew what year it was, whether I could count backward from 100. At the time, I'd laughed it off, answered everything correctly. The doctor had seemed satisfied, but now I understood. That wasn't a routine checkup. That was them building a case, documenting that I was evaluated, getting official records they could use against me. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Grandma? My granddaughter's voice pulled me back. Are you okay? Yes, baby, I said softly. I'm okay. But I wasn't. Not really. Because sitting there in my car, driving down streets I'd known for 40 years, I realized something that made my chest ache. My own son. The boy I'd raised, the child I'd rocked to sleep and nursed through fevers and cheered for at every baseball game. He'd looked at me and seen nothing but dollar signs. He'd planned my future without asking me. He'd decided where I would live, what I would sign, what I would lose. They'd already decided what to do with me, while I was still alive. While I was still perfectly capable of making my own choices. And the worst part? They'd almost gotten away with it. If not for a 10-year-old girl with a napkin and a pen, I would have walked right into their trap. After I dropped my granddaughter back at the house, I drove home alone. The silence in the car felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes before a decision. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a moment, engine off, staring at the front porch light I'd left on that morning. This house. My house. I'd lived here for 40 years. 40 years of memories soaked into every wall, every floorboard, every corner of every room. I walked inside and stood in the entryway, really looking at it for the first time in months, maybe years. When you live somewhere that long, you stop seeing it. It just becomes background. But tonight, I saw everything. The small dent in the hallway wall where my son had crashed his bike indoors when he was 8. I'd been so angry that day. He'd cried and apologized, and I'd hugged him anyway, because that's what mothers do. The kitchen window above the sink where I used to stand washing dishes while my husband tinkered in the garage. I could still see him out there sometimes in my mind, humming off key, covered in grease, happy. We'd bought this house together when we were young and foolish and barely able to afford the down payment. It was smaller then, before we added the sunroom, before we finished the basement, before we turned it into the home we'd dreamed about on our wedding night. My husband had died 12 years ago. Heart attack. Sudden. One day he was here, the next he wasn't. For months after, I'd walk through these rooms and expect to see him, expect to hear his voice calling me from the backyard, or smell his coffee brewing in the morning. The grief had been unbearable, but I'd stayed. I'd kept the house. I'd paid off the mortgage with the life insurance money and my own savings. Every single payment had come from my hands, my work, my sacrifice. This wasn't just property. This was the place where I'd become a mother, where I'd buried my face in a pillow and cried after miscarriages, where I'd painted nurseries and stayed up all night with colicky babies, where I'd made birthday cakes and Halloween costumes and Christmas memories. I walked into my son's old bedroom. It was a guest room now, but if I closed my eyes, I could still see his posters on the walls, his trophies on the shelf, his messy clothes on the floor that I'd nagged him about 1,000 times. He used to tell me he loved me every night before bed. Even as a teenager, even when his friends thought it was uncool, he'd hug me and say, "Love you, Mom." When did that boy disappear? When did he start looking at me like I was a burden instead of his mother? I sat down on the edge of the guest bed, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on my shoulders. I remembered the first time Melissa had walked through this house after they got engaged. She'd smiled politely, but I'd caught her whispering to my son in the kitchen, "It's so outdated. You'll definitely want to renovate before selling." Selling. Even then, even before they were married, she'd been planning what to do with my home. And my son had just nodded, agreed, as if it was already decided. Over the years, the comments had gotten bolder. "You really should downsize, Mom. This yard is too much work for someone your age. Wouldn't you be happier somewhere simpler?" I'd brushed them off, laughed, changed the subject. But they'd been planting seeds, preparing me, wearing me down. Well, I wasn't worn down, not even close. I stood up from the bed and walked to the window. Outside, the streetlights cast a soft glow over the neighborhood. I knew every house on this block. I'd watched children grow up here. I'd brought casseroles to new neighbors and attended block parties and shoveled snow from Mrs. Patterson's driveway when her husband passed. This was my life, my home, my history, and they thought they could just take it? Sign a few papers and erase 40 years like it meant nothing? I felt something harden inside me, not anger exactly, something colder, something more focused. They wanted my house? They'd have to drag me out before I handed it over. And even then, I'd make sure they got nothing but walls and regret. I barely slept that night. My mind kept circling back to 2 weeks earlier. The pieces were all there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. It had been a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because Tuesdays were my grocery days, and I'd just gotten home when my son's car pulled into the driveway. He'd brought Melissa with him. They were carrying takeout bags from that Chinese place downtown, the one with the orange chicken I liked. "Surprise," my son had said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thought we'd have lunch with you?" I'd been pleased, genuinely pleased. It wasn't often they stopped by unannounced anymore. Life gets busy, I told myself. They have their own things to deal with. We'd sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd served them Thanksgiving dinner just hours ago, the same one where my granddaughter had slipped me that note. Melissa had been unusually chatty that day, complimenting my curtains, asking about my book club, wondering if I'd been sleeping well. "You look tired, Mom," my son had said, reaching across to pat my hand. "Are you sure you're getting enough rest?" I'd laughed. "I'm 72, dear. Tired comes with the territory." But he hadn't laughed back. Instead, he'd exchanged a look with Melissa, one of those married people looks that speaks volumes without words. "Actually, Mom, that's kind of why we're here," he'd continued. "We've been worried about you." "Worried?" I'd set down my fork. "Whatever for." Melissa had leaned forward then, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We just think maybe living alone isn't the safest option anymore. You're not getting any younger." There it was. That phrase, "you're not getting any younger." As if I didn't know my own age. As if every morning I didn't wake up and feel it in my bones. "I'm perfectly fine," I'd said, keeping my tone light. "I've been managing this house for longer than you two have been married." My son had pulled out a folder then. Thick. Official looking. "We know, Mom, we know you're independent, but we've been looking into some options, just to protect you, and, well, to protect your assets." "Assets," I'd repeated. "You mean my house?" "It's not just about the house," Melissa had said quickly. "It's about making sure everything is in order. Legal documents, power of attorney, healthcare directives, all the things people should have sorted out at your age." She'd slid the folder across the table toward me. "We just need you to look these over, sign where we've marked. It's all standard stuff. For your safety. For your safety." That phrase had landed wrong even then. Safety from what? I'd lived in this house longer than most people stay married. I knew where every light switch was in the dark. I knew which floorboard creaked and which cabinet door stuck. I'd opened the folder and flipped through the pages. Legal jargon, dense paragraphs, signature lines highlighted in yellow. "This seems like a lot," I'd said carefully. "Maybe I should have my own lawyer look at it first." The temperature in the room had dropped. I'd felt it, seen it in the way my son's jaw tightened, in the way Melissa's smile froze on her face. "A lawyer," my son had said. "Mom, we're family, we're trying to help you. Why would you need a lawyer?" "It's just sensible," I'd replied. "Anytime someone asks you to sign legal documents, you should have them reviewed." Melissa had laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Honestly, Mom, you're being paranoid. These are insurance forms, medical directives, nothing sinister." But I'd held firm. "I'll think about it." They'd left shortly after that. The takeout container's still half full. The smile's gone. My son had kissed my cheek at the door, but it felt mechanical, obligatory. "Don't take too long to think," he'd said. "These things have deadlines." I'd watched them drive away, and even then, something had felt off. Something in the urgency of their visit, in the frustration barely hidden behind their polite masks. Now, sitting in my living room at 2 a.m, I understood completely. They hadn't needed my permission. They'd just needed my signature. And when I wouldn't give it willingly, they decided to get it another way. The medical evaluation my granddaughter had mentioned, the notary they'd planned to bring to Thanksgiving dinner, the papers they'd forge if they had to. They'd backed themselves into a corner with their greed, and now they were willing to do anything to get what they wanted. My house, my independence, my dignity. They thought I was an old woman they could manipulate. Someone too tired or confused or lonely to fight back. They were wrong. I didn't go back to bed. There was no point. My mind was too awake, too focused. Instead, I made myself a pot of tea and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. Old-fashioned, I know, but I've always thought better with a pen in my hand. I wrote down everything. Every visit. Every comment. Every time they'd tried to push those papers in front of me. Every strange question that doctor had asked during what I'd thought was a routine appointment. By the time the sun came up, I had 3 pages filled front and back, and I had a plan. At 9 o'clock sharp, I called my granddaughter's cell phone. Her mother had given it to her last year, mostly so they could track where she was. But right now, I was grateful for it. "Grandma?" she answered, her voice quiet. She was probably at school. "Sweetheart, I need your help today. Can you tell your mother you're not feeling well, that you need to come stay with me?" There was a pause. Then, "Yes, I can do that." Smart girl. She didn't ask questions. She just trusted me. An hour later, she was sitting in my passenger seat as I drove downtown. She'd brought her backpack and told her mother she had a headache. Melissa hadn't even argued, probably relieved to have her out of the way. "Where are we going?" my granddaughter asked. "First, the bank," I said. "Then, to see a lawyer." Her eyes widened. "Really? Really?" The bank was quiet that morning. Mr. Peters, the branch manager, had known me for almost 20 years. He'd helped me refinance after my husband died. He'd been patient and kind when I'd sat in his office crying over paperwork I didn't understand. When I walked in with my granddaughter, he smiled and waved us toward his desk. "Mrs. Harrison," he said warmly, "good to see you. What can I help you with today?" I sat down and folded my hands in my lap. "I need to make some changes to my accounts. Security measures." His smile faded slightly. "Is everything all right?" "Not exactly," I said. "I have reason to believe someone may try to access my accounts without my permission." "Family members." He nodded slowly, his expression serious now. "I see. That happens more often than you'd think, unfortunately. I want to add additional security, passwords, verification questions. And I want to make sure that no one, and I mean no one, can make changes or withdrawals without me physically being present with identification." Mr. Peters pulled out some forms. "We can absolutely do that. I'll set up what we call enhanced authentication. It means even with power of attorney documents, which I assume is what you're worried about, nothing can happen without your explicit in-person consent." I felt a weight lift off my chest. "Thank you." "Mrs. Harrison?" he said gently, leaning forward. "May I ask, are you safe? Do you feel threatened?" I glanced at my granddaughter, who sat quietly beside me, and then back at him. "I'm not in physical danger, but someone is trying to take advantage of me, financially. He handed me a business card. This is our elder protection specialist. She works with seniors who are dealing with financial exploitation. She can help you understand your rights and options. I tucked the card into my purse. I'm already one step ahead. I have a lawyer's appointment this afternoon. He smiled, this time with something like respect. Good, you're doing everything right. After we left the bank, I took my granddaughter to lunch at a small diner near the courthouse. She ordered pancakes even though it was noon, and I didn't say a word about it. Sometimes rules can be broken. Are you scared? She asked me between bites. A little, I admitted. But mostly I'm angry, and anger, when you use it right, can be powerful. At 2:00, we walked into the law office of Catherine Mills, an attorney my neighbor had recommended. Mrs. Patterson had used her when her own son had tried something similar 5 years ago. Catherine was younger than I expected, maybe 50, short gray hair and sharp eyes behind black-rimmed glasses. She listened to my entire story without interrupting. I showed her the notes I'd written, the timeline, the attempted documents. I told her about the medical evaluation I hadn't consented to, about the notary they'd planned to bring to Thanksgiving dinner. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and looked at me for a long moment. Mrs. Harrison, what you're describing is textbook elder financial abuse, possibly even attempted fraud if they forged your signature on anything. Can you help me? I asked. She smiled. Not a friendly smile, a warrior's smile. Absolutely. First thing we're going to do is create a revocable living trust. We'll transfer your home and major assets into it. That means even if they somehow got power of attorney documents, they couldn't touch anything. The trust protects you. How long will that take? If we move fast? A week. Maybe less. She looked at my granddaughter. And you, young lady, you're very brave. What you did might have saved your grandmother from losing everything. My granddaughter blushed but sat up straighter. Catherine pulled out a legal pad. I'm going to need you to tell me exactly what you heard that night. Every word you can remember. You're a witness, and that matters. For the next hour, my granddaughter recounted everything. The conversations she'd overheard, the names mentioned, the timeline. Catherine wrote it all down. When we finally stood to leave, she walked us to the door and put a hand on my shoulder. Mrs. Harrison, I want you to know something. People like your son and his wife, they count on you being too scared or too ashamed to fight back. They count on you staying quiet. I'm done being quiet, I said. She grinned. Good, because we're going to make sure they never touch what's yours again. 3 days later, my phone rang. I was in the kitchen making dinner when I saw his name on the screen. I let it ring twice more before answering, steadying my voice. Hello? Mom. My son's voice was tight, strained. We need to talk. Of course, dear. How are you? How am I? He let out a bitter laugh. I'm confused, actually. Melissa's parents were really upset about Thanksgiving. You just left without saying goodbye, without even finishing dinner. I stirred the pot on the stove, keeping my tone light. I wasn't feeling well. I thought I mentioned that. You could have stayed. We would have taken care of you. Taken care of me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'm fine now, I said. Just needed some rest. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end, frustrated, trying to find the right words. Listen, Mom, about the other thing, the paperwork we discussed. What paperwork? The documents. The ones we brought over a couple weeks ago. You said you'd think about it. I opened the fridge, pulled out some vegetables. Calm, steady. Oh, those, yes, I've been thinking. His tone shifted, became sharper, and I'm still considering my options. Mom, we don't have time for this. There it was, the impatience breaking through. These things have deadlines, legal windows. If we don't get this sorted out soon, it becomes much more complicated. Complicated for whom? I asked. Silence. For you, he said finally. For your protection, we're trying to help you. I wanted to laugh, to scream, to ask him when he'd stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as a problem to solve. But I didn't. I kept my voice calm. I appreciate your concern. Do you? His voice rose slightly. Because honestly, Mom, it doesn't feel like it. We've been trying to help you for months, and you keep pushing back. It's like you don't trust us. Should I? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Another pause. Longer this time. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, dear. I'm just tired. He sighed heavily. Look, the notary we had lined up for Thanksgiving, he's willing to come by your house this week, Wednesday afternoon. It'll take 20 minutes, tops. Just sign the papers, and we can all move forward. What exactly am I signing? We've been over this. Power of attorney, medical directives, property transfer into a family trust, standard stuff for someone your age. Someone your age. There it was again. And if I don't want to sign? His voice went cold. Then we'll have to pursue other options. Legal options. We already have the medical evaluation showing you're experiencing cognitive decline. We have documented evidence of forgetfulness and poor judgment. If you won't do this voluntarily, we can have you declared incompetent. My hand tightened around the phone. There it was. The threat laid bare. But instead of fear, I felt something else. Clarity. Certainty. I see, I said quietly. Mom, we don't want it to come to that. Just sign the papers. Make this easy. Who's the lawyer helping you with this? I asked. You mentioned Melissa's cousin? Yeah, Richard. He specializes in elder law. He says this is the best way to protect your assets from nursing home costs down the line. Nursing home costs. They'd already decided where I'd end up. Well, I said, injecting a note of resignation into my voice. I suppose you're right. I have been feeling forgetful lately. I could practically hear him relax on the other end. See, that's good, Mom. That's really good. So, Wednesday works? Let me check my calendar and call you back. Don't take too long. Richard says the window for doing this voluntarily closes soon. I understand. Good. His voice warmed slightly, taking on that false affection again. I'm glad you finally understand. We're doing this because we love you. I looked out the window at the garden I'd planted, the trees I'd watched grow, the home I'd built. Yes, I said softly. I understand perfectly. After I hung up, I stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand. Then I called Catherine Mills. They're planning to come Wednesday, I told her, with forged documents and threats. Perfect, she said. By Wednesday, your trust will be filed and recorded. Let them come. Let them try. They didn't wait until Wednesday. On Monday afternoon, I heard a car door slam in my driveway. I looked out the window and saw my son's silver sedan, him and Melissa, both wearing business casual clothes. She was carrying that same thick folder. They were coming to ambush me, to catch me off guard. I almost smiled. I opened the door before they could knock. This is a surprise. My son looked uncomfortable. Hey, Mom. We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by. Save you a trip on Wednesday. How thoughtful, I said, stepping aside. Come in. They walked past me into the living room. Melissa set her purse and the folder on the coffee table with a soft thud. We brought the documents, she said brightly. Richard looked everything over. All you need to do is sign an initial in a few places and we're all set. Would you like some tea? I asked. My son waved his hand. We're fine, Mom. Let's just get this done. I sat down in my armchair, the one my husband used to read the newspaper in every Sunday morning. They sat on the couch across from me, the coffee table between us like a battlefield. Melissa opened the folder and spread several documents out in front of me. Pages and pages of legal text, signature lines marked with little colored tabs. This one is the power of attorney, she explained, pointing. This gives us authority to handle your finances and make medical decisions if you're unable to. And this one, my son continued, sliding another document forward, transfers the house into a family trust for estate planning purposes, to avoid probate. I picked up the first document and pretended to read it. Let them think I was considering it. It's a lot to take in, I said slowly. We know, Melissa said, her voice syrupy. That's why we're here to help, to explain anything you don't understand. I set the papers down and looked at them both, really looked at them, my son avoiding eye contact, Melissa with that practiced smile. Before I sign anything, I said, I have a question. Of course, my son said. When were you planning to tell me about the medical evaluation? His face went pale. What medical evaluation? Melissa said quickly, but her voice was too high, too defensive. The one you arranged without my knowledge. The one where the doctor asked me all those questions about my memory, my cognitive function. I leaned forward slightly. The one you're planning to use to prove I'm incompetent if I don't sign these papers willingly. The silence in the room was deafening. Mom, I don't know what you're talking about, my son started, but I held up my hand. Please don't insult my intelligence. Melissa's smile disappeared. Look, we were just trying to be thorough, to make sure you were okay. To build a case against me, you mean? My son stood up. This is ridiculous. We're trying to help you, and you're acting paranoid. Sit down, I said quietly. Something in my tone made him pause, made him sit back down. I reached beside my chair and pulled out my own folder, thicker than theirs. I set it on the coffee table between us. What's that? Melissa asked. Legal filings I made last week, I said calmly. With my attorney. My son's jaw tightened. What attorney? Catherine Mills. Perhaps you've heard of her. She specializes in elder law, specifically protecting seniors from financial exploitation. I opened the folder and slid a document toward them. This is a revocable living trust. My house, my savings, my assets, they're all protected now. Even if you somehow manage to get power of attorney, you can't touch any of it. Melissa snatched up the document, her eyes scanning frantically. You can't do this without consulting us. Actually, I can. It's my property, my money, my life. But we're family, my son said, his voice cracking slightly. Family doesn't forge signatures, I replied. Family doesn't try to have their mother declared incompetent so they can steal her home. We weren't stealing anything, Melissa snapped. We were protecting your assets. I pulled out another paper. This is interesting. It's a report from a handwriting analyst. She compared the signatures you submitted to the county last month with my actual signature. My son's face went from pale to gray. Turns out they don't match, I continued, which means you attempted fraud, forgery, both of which are crimes. We didn't forge anything, Melissa said, but her hands were shaking now. Then explain how documents with my supposed signature were filed at the county recorder's office when I never signed them, when I never even saw them. They looked at each other. Trapped. My attorney has copies of everything, I said. The forged documents, the medical evaluation I didn't consent to, the timeline of your visits and attempts to manipulate me. I paused. And she has a witness statement from someone who overheard you planning all of this. Who? My son demanded. I didn't answer, didn't need to. Melissa stood abruptly. This is insane. We were trying to help you. Help yourselves, maybe. I stood too, walked to the door and opened it. I think it's time for you to leave. Mom, my son said, his voice pleading now. Don't do this. We can work something out. We could have, I said. If you'd asked instead of plotted, if you'd treated me like a person instead of an obstacle. Melissa grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. My son followed more slowly, looking back at me with something between anger and desperation. At the doorway, he stopped. You're making a mistake. No, I said quietly. You made the mistake. You should have known better than to underestimate me. They left without another word. The door closed behind them with a soft click. I stood there for a moment, listening to their car start and pull away. Then I walked back to my chair, sat down, and let out a long, slow breath. It was done. The house felt different after they left. Quieter, but not in a lonely way. In a peaceful way. I called my granddaughter that evening and asked if she could come stay the night. Her mother agreed without hesitation, probably relieved to have her out of the house while they dealt with their humiliation. When she arrived with her overnight bag, I had hot cocoa waiting on the stove, the kind with real milk and melted chocolate, not the powder from a packet. We sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from our mugs. Did they come? She asked. They came. What happened? I reached across and squeezed her hand. You saved me. That's what happened. Everything I was able to do, I did because you warned me that night. She looked down at her cocoa. I was so scared. I thought maybe I shouldn't say anything, that maybe I heard wrong. But you trusted your instincts. That's brave. Are you mad at them? She asked, looking up at me with those wide, serious eyes. I thought about that for a moment. Really thought about it. No, I said finally. I'm not mad. I'm disappointed. And disappointment is different from anger. Anger burns hot and fades. But disappointment, that stays. It changes how you see someone. She nodded slowly, processing that. Will they come back? They might try, I said. But if they do, my attorney will handle it. I don't have to fight them face to face anymore. The law will do that for me. She sipped her cocoa, got a little mustache of chocolate on her upper lip. I reached over with a napkin and wiped it away, and for a moment we both smiled. That night, she slept in the guest room, and I slept better than I had in weeks. The letters started arriving about a week later. First from their attorney, Richard. A formal demand for reconsideration of family property distribution. My attorney, Catherine, responded with an equally formal letter explaining that there was nothing to reconsider. The property was legally protected, and any further harassment would result in a restraining order. Then came a letter from my son, handwritten, 3 pages of how hurt he was, how I'd misunderstood their intentions, how they were only trying to help. I read it once and filed it away. Didn't respond. 2 weeks after that, they showed up at church. I saw them walk in during the opening hymn, sliding into a pew near the back. Melissa had her hand on my son's arm, both of them wearing their Sunday best and their most pious expressions. After the service, they tried to approach me in the fellowship hall. My son opened his mouth to speak, but I simply smiled, took my granddaughter's hand, and walked past them. People notice things in small communities. Whispers start. Why doesn't she talk to her son anymore? Did you hear what they tried to do? Can you imagine? Your own mother? I never said a word against them. Never had to. The truth has a way of getting out all on its own. A month passed. Then 2. Their calls stopped. The letters stopped. They realized, finally, that there was nothing left to take. Nothing left to manipulate. Last night, I stood by my bedroom window looking out over the backyard. The garden needed weeding. The fence needed painting. All the little tasks that come with owning a home. But they were my tasks. My home. My choice. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from my granddaughter. "Good night, Grandma. I love you. I'm glad you're safe." I typed back slowly, my old fingers clumsy on the small keyboard. "Because of you, I am." When I turned off the light and climbed into bed, I thought about everything that had happened. How close I'd come to losing it all. Not just the house, but my independence, my dignity. My right to live my own life on my own terms. For years, I'd believed that family was everything, that blood ties were unbreakable, that love would always protect. But I learned something important these past few months. Sometimes the people who love you most aren't the ones you're related to. Sometimes it's a 10-year-old girl with a napkin and the courage to tell the truth. And sometimes, survival isn't about fighting back loud and hard. Sometimes it's about being smart, being prepared, knowing when to walk away and when to stand your ground. I thought revenge would feel explosive, satisfying in some dramatic way. But it didn't. It felt like silence. The kind of silence that comes after a storm. When the wind stops howling and the rain stops falling and you realize you're still standing. Still here. Still home. Before I go, I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to stand up to family? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, if it made you think or feel something, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Because life has taught me that sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths, and your voice matters too. Good night, and thank you for listening.